Angelina Jolie in Ukraine, the federal government is still shut down, and how Trump claims Putin admitted he is unable to finish Ukraine war for 10 years. We'll talk about this with David Tafuri, international lawyer and former US State Department official. Mr. Tafuri, it's a pleasure to welcome you and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
David, Hollywood actress and UN Goodwill Ambassador Angelina Jolie visited Mykolaiv and Kherson with the international charity organization Legacy of War Foundation, according to Instagram of organization. This is the first official press release about the actress's visit, since several media outlets reported yesterday that Jolie had traveled to southern Ukraine. The Hollywood actress, model, and director met with local doctors, families, and volunteers who continue their daily lives under the constant threat of shelling and mines. What is your reaction to Angelina Jolie's visit to Mykolaiv and Kherson? How do you perceive the role of international figures like Jolie in bringing attention to the ongoing challenges in southern Ukraine?
Personally, I think it's important, and I commend Angelina Jolie for having the courage and the determination to visit Ukraine and to go near to the front lines. And I worked with UNHCR in the past, and she's a goodwill ambassador and spokesperson for UNHCR, and she does a great job of raising awareness about displacement persons and refugees and the plight of refugees, and the number of refugees around the world has gone up, unfortunately, including because of the illegal action of Russia in invading Ukraine and other authoritarian regimes that have destabilized their neighbors. And so it's important for her to raise awareness not just about the situation in Ukraine, but about the impact that of an authoritarian country taking actions that ignore the well-being of the people in their neighboring countries and that cause displacement and cause refugees. And so I think it's really important, that's the humanitarian side of the international effort to support Ukraine. And that also needs attention in addition to the economic side, which is sanctions on Russia, and the military side, which is getting Ukraine the weapons they need.
Is very important, and we want to say thanks for supporting Ukraine. Uh, in about what is happening in the United States, because President Donald Trump has been in office during the two longest government shutdowns in American history. The current shutdown entered its 36th day on November 5th, as Democrats and Republicans have been unable to come to an agreement on the expiring health subsidies at the center of the debate. The Trump administration has widely blamed Democrats for the shutdown, and Democrats say Republicans are refusing to negotiate. How does the current government shutdown compare in scale, duration, and impact to previous shutdowns in US history? Uh, what are the political consequences of both parties blaming each other for the shutdown, and how could these affect public perception and voter behavior?
First of all, this is a very bad development for our country, and it is going to cause an economic impact on our country, both because a lot of federal government employees are not being paid, and also because a lot of benefits that Americans receive have now been cut off, including the SNAP, which is food stamps for those who need help with buying food for their families and with nutrition for their families. And I think politically, both sides seem to think that they're winning. And that's why neither side has been willing to make a compromise. And a compromise is necessary, and it's maybe going to take concessions from both sides. We just had elections on Tuesday, and Democrats did better than expected. So that may cause Democrats to think that they are not being blamed and that the Trump administration is being blamed. But I think that's a bit dangerous, because my expectation is that Americans probably blame both parties and are very upset with the leadership of the parties that they can't reach common ground. And so that's what needs to happen. But unfortunately, as you mentioned, the timeline is unclear. There doesn't seem to be any specific thing that's going to happen that's going to force both sides to make a concession. Perhaps that is just the end of the year, and maybe there's an understanding on both sides that we can't go into the holidays with a government still shut down, but nobody knows.
You mentioned economic impacts. What short term and long term economic impacts are emerging from prolonged federal funding gaps, including effects on federal employees, contractors, and the broader economy?
Well, I think this is gonna, hurt productivity in our country. Both because of what you mentioned, with people who work for the federal government not getting paid, but also all of the companies that depend on decision making by the U.S. government, that need to get licenses from the U.S. government, that rely on travel, and so travel has been impacted in the United States, because air traffic controllers are federal employees. So the ramifications are very substantial, and we're only starting to feel them now, even though the government shutdown has been going on for a while. And as it goes longer and longer, the impact becomes exponentially more difficult for our economy.
Could the funding in pace affect US commitments abroad, such as foreign aid, military support for allies, or international agreements?
Yeah, everything can be impacted. And the Trump administration is looking to, retaliate against Democrats by striking out the programs that they support. And the administration has a lot of decision making thought about how and whether to spend money. So all of those programs could be impacted as well. Now, theoretically, it the national security and diplomacy of the United States should not be stopped, because those are considered, critical responsibilities, and the people who have those jobs in the State Department, the Department of Defense, are still working. But it is also impacting them and limiting them in what they can do, including limiting the ability of diplomats to travel.
After local elections in several states, White House officials said Republicans are losing popularity due to insufficient focus on domestic issues in the US, according to Politico. Trump's team believes that the president has devoted too little attention to the issues that concern voters. The most, a source close to the White House said that an excessive focus on foreign policy while people were struggling at home had produced exactly the results or one would expect. To what extent has the Trump administration's focus on foreign policy contributed to a perceived neglect of domestic issues, in your opinion?
I'm not sure. I would say that if that, is impacting the president, it's not because he has done too much foreign policy. Foreign policy is important. The United States needs to stay engaged in foreign policy, and I commend President Trump not for all the decisions he's made on foreign policy, but for the fact that he has recognized the importance of the U.S. being engaged with foreign countries, being engaged in trying to resolve crises around the world, including wars like the war in Ukraine. So the Trump administration needs to do both. It doesn't need to decrease the amount of focus and resources on foreign policy, but maybe it needs to increase the focus on domestic issues, and the issues, frankly, that President Trump won on. In many ways, he won, at least in part, because of inflation and the perceived uh, notion that inflation was too high under the Biden administration. And so he ought to be recognizing that in order to keep voters happy, he needs to be addressing inflation, also addressing unemployment, and making sure the economy continues to grow. And maybe some of his decisions are not accomplishing that, and they need to rethink, how they approach domestic issues.
Mhm. Yes, President Donald Trump also expressed his intention to turn the US into Bitcoin superpower and the crypto capital of the world, according to his remarks at the American Business Forum in Miami. Trump said, "We are marking the United States, the Bitcoin superpower, the crypto capital of the world." He added that if the US does not focus on cryptocurrency, China will step in to do so. How feasible is it for the United States to outpace China in cryptocurrency development and adoption? And what do you think about this crypto world, as we can say?
Well, it's been clear that the Trump administration is very supportive of cryptocurrency, and I don't expect that there's going to be, new overbearing regulation on cryptocurrencies, at least during the Trump administration. And not having significant regulation makes the U.S. a destination where crypto companies are interested in acting and interested in headquartering and being engaged. I don't really know what the Trump administration is thinking about, in terms of increasing the presence of cryptocurrency companies. And I think we have to be careful because cryptocurrencies are competing with the U.S. dollar. It's a separate and different store of value, but we want to also make sure that the U.S. dollar continues to be the most used currency around the world.
Yes, President Donald Trump said that 2 weeks ago, Russian dictator Vladimir Putin asked him for help in resolving the war in Ukraine, according to Trump's remarks at the American Business Forum in Miami. Also, Trump stated that during their phone call, Putin claimed he has been trying to end the war for 10 years, but has been unable to do so. The U.S. president said, "I spoke to him 2 weeks ago, and he said we have been trying to settle that war for 10 years. We weren't able to do it. You got us settled." How do statements like these interact with ongoing sanctions, military aid, and diplomatic pressure on Moscow? And what do you think about these statements?
Well, Putin is lying to the American president. He's being very dishonest, and it's almost laughable that he would claim that he's been trying to resolve the war in Ukraine. He started the war in Ukraine. It was a war of choice. He gave the direction to the military to invade Ukraine. Obviously, this all started back in 2014, and this is the product of Putin's mismanagement of the foreign policy of Russia, of his interest in trying to take more territory and restore the Soviet Union and the empire that the Soviet Union had. And President Trump should push back against that notion, that he make clear that he doesn't accept the misinformation that Putin is putting out there about the origins of the war in Ukraine. But I expect this isn't going to change President Trump's approach to Ukraine, and he has put new sanctions on oil companies in Russia. That's a very welcome development, and the U.S. needs to continue to ratchet up sanctions and economic measures against Russia while also supporting Ukraine in other ways. A very important way he could support Ukraine is he's meeting with Orban, the head of Hungary, soon, and Hungary is holding up the accession talks for Ukraine to the EU, and it would be really great if Trump put pressure on Orban to withdraw its objection to Ukraine starting talks about joining the EU.
We're waiting for this visit and hope that everything will be good for Ukraine. Yes, President Donald Trump stated that the United States holds the status of the world's #1 nuclear power, and noted that the country may be working on a denuclearization plan together with Russia and China, though he provided no further details. What might a U.S. led denuclearization plan with Russia and China entail, and what are the key obstacles to its implementation?
Well, it's hard to understand exactly what Trump's strategy is here, and maybe he doesn't want us to know because he announced new nuclear tests, which the United States hasn't done for 30 years or more. And Putin responded by saying now Russia is going to do nuclear tests. That's not a good development. That the moratorium on testing made it, at least incrementally less likely that a country would use nuclear weapons. And I would hope we would continue that moratorium. We obviously have to maintain our nuclear arsenal, but it's in our interest and the world's interest for there to be no new testing of nuclear weapons and no development of new nuclear weapons. And we certainly don't want to see proliferation of nuclear weapons to other countries that don't have them already.
We see that Russia start to talk about these more and more, and we see how Russian propaganda continues. Also, campaigns spreading disinformation about NATO preparing to attack Russia, according to the Center for Countering Disinformation. Russian media are actively promoting an interview with Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Alexander Grushko, in which he claims that NATO is practicing a scenario to block the Kaliningrad region while simultaneously reinforcing the region with the troops and equipment. The CCD calls this a typical Kremlin manipulation, of course, measures taken by NATO to strengthen the defense of its member states in response to repeated Russian provocation and threats of force against the Baltics, Poland, Finland, and other alliance members are being falsely portrayed as preparations for an attack on Russia. What do you think about this, and what measures can the international community take to expose and mitigate the impact of Russian propaganda? So, your opinion.
So, more dishonesty and misinformation from the Kremlin. It is in their interest to mislead their people into believing that there's a threat from NATO. There is no such threat from NATO. NATO has never posed a threat to Russia and Russian territory. NATO is a defensive alliance, and it is focused on just defending the borders of the countries that are part of NATO. And of course, Article 5 is the main convening provision in the NATO Charter that requires every NATO member to defend every other NATO member. And so when Russia engages in provocations against NATO, there needs to be a collective response that makes it clear that NATO is going to comply with the Article 5 obligations and protect all NATO countries. And what Russia wants to do is convince people that the war in Ukraine, which is a war of choice that Putin made, is a war of necessity for the defense of Russia. And that's simply not true. And anyone who has been there and who's studied the background for the war and the origins of the war should understand that.
Mr. Tafuri, thank you for important and interesting conversation as always. Thanks for supporting Ukraine and Ukrainian people. It is very important. David Tafuri, international lawyer and former U.S. State Department official, was with us today. Thank you for watching. Please share this interview and continue supporting Ukraine. David, see you.
Дякую. Слава Україні.
Героям слава.